I'm live. Hello. My name is Peter Magnuson, and I have the dubious distinction of being a survivor in the aortic dissection world twice over. So it's been quite a ride over the last 4 years. But before everything really happened, I was coming off, being married for about 10 years at the time, and my wife and I were runners and very active work. I work in the finance industry, so there wasn't a lot of stress there. And trying to stay healthy and doing all the right things. I married a dietitian, so hopefully I was eating right at the time and all that. And there wasn't really any, signs or symptoms going into that fateful day, but it was one of those really, you know, when growing up, I was suspected, quote unquote, of having Marfan, but I wasn't a classic case. You'd walk in and you'd be like, they'd look at me and they'd be like, well, you're 7 inches taller than both your parents, so here's a possibility. But then they would do some of the um, connective tissue tests where you'd try to fold your thumb, and my wingspan wasn't quite long enough. My wingspan is actually shorter than my height, and a few other, calculations that they would do. And they're like, well, you're not a classic case. And so they kind of pushed me along and pushed me out the door. And, when I was 19, they did an echo and said that, your heart looks fine. And that was that. So I really didn't think about anything of it until about 4 years ago. Um, so it was, it was completely unexpected. Obviously, anyone who has been through this knows that there's no signs, no symptoms. It happens, and that was the day. It was May 9th, 2020, and I had gotten up that morning. It was a beautiful day, and took off running for 6 miles. Had a personal record, personal best that day. Finally hit a 10K under an hour, which is pretty good for a guy that had just started running. Was planning on doing the Lincoln Marathon that year. Unfortunately, COVID kind of ruined most everything that year. But yeah, it was a beautiful day, beautiful everything. Came back, showered, took a nap, got work done the rest of the day. We were sitting Fridays for us. That was a Friday, or May 8th, I guess. Friday for us, for our family, is fast food Fridays. So we took the kids out to McDonald's, came back, sitting at the dinner table, and I'm sitting there eating, and I felt the weirdest buildup of pressure and explosion of pain that washed through my entire body. It felt like you had like a piece of food caught in your esophagus and it just wouldn't go down, and then it just released, and it just just everywhere. And I had no idea what was going on. I felt, well, maybe that was just some weird piece of food caught in my throat, and unfortunately it wasn't. But it was, went to the bathroom, kind of looked at myself in the mirror, and then went over to sit on the couch. Kids were going to go upstairs, take a bath. And my son, youngest son, had fallen down the stairs, a couple stairs, and went and grabbed him and carried him up the stairs. And all of a sudden, I noticed something, that my right leg was completely numb. I could feel felt like it was on fire on the inside, but my right leg on the surface was completely numb. Looked at my wife, said, "This something's not right. This is incredibly weird." I didn't have chest pain or back pain or anything at that point in time. But I, looked at my wife and said, what do you think? She goes, well, call my sister. Her sister is a plastic surgeon. So called her. She answered. She was like, probably be best to go to the ER. Just to, that something doesn't feel right with that. So called her parents. Her parents came down to watch the kids, and went through the motions of trying to get everything together. She got me out to the car, and we drove up to the ER. here in Omaha, and went to in and the started to feel the chest pressure at that point. Still didn't have back pain. Never did through this whole process of the first time around. Never had that searing back pain that everybody tells you about. But definitely there was some real chest pressure, and once everything started to settle in, you tell them that you have chest pain. They drop everything and they get you a room. Because you're number one on the triage chart. And got me in the room, and then started to do the hook you up for everything. It's amazing how many wires they can throw on you. But they started looking at you like you're having a heart attack, and started to thinking, well, maybe I'm just, that's what it is, and we can get this figured out. But I wasn't, they started doing the blood tests and everything else, and nothing was coming back that said heart attack. I guess there's some enzyme or hormone that your heart spills during a cardiac event, and I can't remember what it is, but I know that it wasn't present, and so they were kind of befuddled with everything that was going on, and then the violent vomiting started. Basically, everything I had for dinner came back up, and nothing would stay down. I would take a sip of water, it would come right back up. There was no calming my stomach at all from that, and we stayed there back and forth. They kept trying to come back. They kept coming back in and drawing blood to see if there was anything that they could find in the hormone or the enzyme or whatever that is to see if it was a heart attack or anything along those lines. Nothing, and I was still completely just paralyzed with pain. Now the feeling had started to come back in my legs, so everything was like, well, maybe this is just something completely weird, and nothing was happening. And the doctor started to talk about just discharging me and sending me on my way. As my wife will tell you, she's glad they didn't. But it was a case where she started to get mad and started to advocate. She's like, no, there's something wrong with this. And then one of the other doctors, and this is where things kind of start to get hazy as far as exact memory, but I remember a couple people arguing about whether to admit me or to discharge me, and the admit me parts won. And as they're wheeling me up to the room and everything, I kind of make the offhand remark about gosh, when they tested me for Marfan's, I always thought, it would be my heart going. And one of the nurses looked at me like I had just given them the keys to the kingdom, but in a bad way. So it was not very long after that they were like, we're going to, bring somebody in, just do some routine tests. Everybody was unnervingly calm during this process. The tech to do the ultrasound on your heart. Once that was done, apparently she knew. She did my follow-up. The girl that did my ultrasound did my follow-up. She was like, yeah, I was sitting there going, sweating bullets, and I'm surprised you didn't notice. And I was like, I had no idea. I was just kind of laughing, thinking, yeah, you're not going to find anything, and I'm going to go home, and we're all going to laugh about this the next day. But she left. The doctor walks in. She goes, we're going to get you a CT scan. And that was when I learned that if they want to give you a CT scan and there's no wait, they just shove you right in there. It's bad, like really bad. So at that point, I should have known something was terribly wrong. But I'm just kind of, like, gosh, this still hurts. Something doesn't feel right. They were helping me get onto the CT, going through that whole process, getting the contrast and going through the whole motions, and joking about things. And then that finished, went back up into the room, kind of sat by myself for a little while and just kind of, was just kind of by myself with my thoughts. Now, again, this is height of early stages of COVID. So having a visitor at that point in time was not allowed. They basically kicked my wife out at that point, and was not able to have any visitors from that point on. So it was a very lonely experience. So from here on out, I'm basically trying to recount things from what I can remember, because there was nobody with me at that point. Except for one not really nice part. My sister-in-law pulled the I'm a doctor card and um, wife got my wife along with her to get up to my room, but that's a little bit later. Again, I have ADD, so sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit. So the CT results come back up, the doctor comes in, she starts talking to me, and then everything just kind of starts, every word she says is a lot like the Charlie Brown adult. I have no idea what she was talking about. She looked very pale in the face. She looked almost like, I don't know how you're still alive type of situation, which, knowing what I know now, that's exactly the way that you would look at somebody in my situation at that point in time. But it was we're going to transfer you. We're this. I've called your wife. Is there anybody else you want me to call? And yeah, I called my parents. Here's their phone number. And then she left. She came back afterwards after she had gotten a hold of my parents, and then she basically said, "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to transfer you. You're going to have open heart surgery. Do you have living will, things like that? Do all this?" And then wife and sister-in-law come in, and they obviously look very pale as well. My sister-in-law, I started quizzing her more than the doctor who was attending to me about what was going on, and but in good bedside manner, she's like, "Oh, you'll live through this. Don't worry about it." Have no idea what she was actually thinking because I never actually haven't asked her at this point. But that's when you kind of look at your wife and you're like, okay, well, if this is it, this is it. All these things. The things that were running through my head were, I have two boys at the time. They were 3 and 2. Yeah, 3 and 2. You start to get a little bit mad that you're not going to see all the things that you thought you were going to see when they were born, graduating high school and all that. So you kind of get into sorry, choking up a little bit, going back through through the memories. But you get a little bit, reminiscent of what you might have been there. But it was a very peaceful moment, though. It was very strange how calm I was. I don't remember feeling nervous. I don't remember feeling out of place. It was kind of more resigned to whatever fate that I was, involved with. Then the ambulance people came, loaded me up, got me transported down the way a few times. At this point, my sons tell me they're jealous because I got to ride in an ambulance with lights and sirens. So I have that going for me, which is nice. Loaded me up, got into the prep room. Again, Katie pulled the I'm a doctor card, got her and my wife into the room, even though they weren't supposed to be in there. Nurses weren't going to tell her to leave. So, but yeah, nurses and techs and stuff coming in, getting me all IV'd up, getting everything ready. It was getting ready to go. And yeah, this is where the tears start. Wife and I say our, quote unquote, goodbye to each other. And they wheel me in. And that's about the last thing I remember. The one thing I do weirdly, oddly enough, remember is they were about ready to put the oxygen and sleep mask on me. And they're like, "Is there, anything else?" And I'm like, "I have a temporary crown here, I don't know if you need to pop that off or not." And they're like, "No, but we'll do our best to work around that." And I don't know why I remember that exact part, but I do. And then that's all I remember. And then think surgery was started. I don't remember the exact times. Um, I just remember it was, surgery was 6 or 7 hours. Um, had to go through the being put on full bypass and things like that. They allowed my wife and her sister to sit in the waiting room. Again, height of COVID, nobody got around to really saying, telling them to leave like they quote unquote should have to adhere to the rules at that point in time. Um, but yeah, and then that when they finished up, I guess I was having a hard time with my O2 sat. And so I was in the ICU for an extended amount of time through into the next morning. And then they got me up into a room about 6 hours after surgery. It took me a while for my body to handle, I guess, the shock of everything. Um, One of the most terrifying things that I've ever experienced in my life, though, was being woken up from that surgery. Uh, you're still intubated when you first start waking up, and it is quite literally one of the absolute most, jarring experiences that I think you can ever have. Apparently, I just started flailing. Because I remember looking at the next day and there were the restraints that they had to use so that I didn't yank the intubation out of my throat. But woke up. They bring you out, but you're not fully out. I guess I don't know how to describe it. You're kind of twilighted. You kind of know what's going on. You know enough of what's going on to try and obviously you've got the reflex response to pull something out of your throat that's gagging you. Uh, but you're not. I don't remember seeing anything. Like I don't remember being able to see or anything like that. But they got me through. I remember them taking it out, um, and then going right. Just I guess my body was just like, all right, time for sleep, and fell asleep. Woke up. My wife and her sister were there. Happy as ever to see me. That was a joyous moment. It was also one of the most painful moments ever in my life. Having your chest completely cracked open and everything was quite the A, emotional roller coaster, but B, the physical pain. I don't know how to describe it. Uh, but you do learn very quickly, like very quickly, just how many muscles and how much of your body uses your chest and your pectorals and your shoulders and things like that just in your average, you know, trying to live. It is um, it is quite jarring in moving an arm and then feeling it all through your chest, just pain all the way through your chest. And then recovering from that was took a long time. I was in the hospital for so that happened. So Friday I was in the hospital. Saturday they did surgery, and then I went home the next Thursday. In the hospital was probably one of the loneliest times ever. Obviously, after Beth left, my wife, they didn't let her back in. She may have ticked off a few nurses trying to get back to me. At least she tells me a story along those lines. But I was alone and completely alone for quite some time. They were worried about me for a little while because the amount of pain, and then I was also having fevers, quite a bit of fevers, and then there was a fluid sac on my left lung that from being closed back up that they were hoping that didn't cause an infection or anything along those lines, which ended up not happening. But it was a very lonely time. And then at that point in time, they were very limited on who could come in and for how long. they could be in your room because of COVID and everything else. So it was a very jarring experience in that, as far as just being lonely. I watched the 6-part series on the Chicago Bulls championship runs. At that point was on ESPN, and it was on repeat, throughout the night. And I think I watched that about 6 or 7 times for about a year there. I could probably word for word the entire 6 hours of that show. But it was, sleep was very, when you wake up from that for 4 months, sleep is, fleeting. But they got me home. My parents stuck around. They drove down from Wisconsin. My in-laws, luckily enough, live in Omaha, so my wife had lots of support. I have friends all over the country, based on the fact of what I do for work, and so there was an outpouring of support from them. Yeah, it was quite amazing how everything kind of came together and worked out as far as the first one is concerned. But yeah, when I got home, I remember, everything settling down and sitting in the chair and finally looking, kind of introspectively and going, what just happened? Because, when you're in the hospital, you're very much in the throes of immediate recovery, which means you're sleeping, 23 hours a day. My favorite part of the hospital recovery was the win of being able to walk down to the end of the hall and back on my second day after surgery. That was absolutely amazing. The other thing that surprised me the most is I had ran a 10K the day before surgery. I could full on. I had done a half marathon earlier that year, or the year before, done all sorts of these things, and now walking to the bathroom completely winded me. And I just couldn't believe how much just instantly everything was gone as far as my endurance. There was nothing left, absolutely nothing. And so, getting home, trying to get upstairs and things like that, it was, you walk up one flight of stairs and there'd be the midpoint where the stairs come back around, and you'd have to sit there at the midpoint and catch your breath. And I'm like, man, I used to just pop out the door and take off running like Forrest Gump, and now I can barely walk upstairs. This is aggravating. But everything was frustrating. You get frustrated with everything because you can't do anything for yourself anymore. Showering was obviously not as much fun anymore because you had to stand there like with indirect water because you couldn't get anything on the front of your chest directly with water. And you had to worry about whether or not you needed a chair in the shower. You had to worry about all these things. So my wife ordered all these things off Amazon. We ended up returning probably 90% of it because, thinking of just how down I was going to be at that point in time. But from that point, I was surprised that I was able to stand in the shower. I was able to at least get up. If I had to go to the bathroom, I didn't need my wife to help me to actually get in and go. However, the whole process and one of the other things that amazed me is I never had to sneeze for like 5 straight months. I never had to sneeze. I know that it would probably have killed me if I had sneezed, which is probably why my body was like, no, you're just not going to do that anymore. But I had lots of people write me notes telling me to press your tongue into the roof of your mouth if you feel like you have a sneeze coming, and it'll stop a sneeze. Because they're like, yeah, I've had a bruised rib, and you know what it's like to sneeze with a bruised rib. Then you know that after open heart surgery, you don't want. That is good advice for that. But yeah, it was, for the first week or so, it was interesting just trying to come up with some sort of routine. And obviously in the hospital, you're not getting very good sleep. You're up every 2 hours, somebody's drawing blood, phlebotomy is in, some sort of therapist is in there to try and get you up. They want you to get you out of the bed and sitting up in a chair and things like that. They kind of gave up on that with me after the second day because I was just like, I no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to get out of bed unless I'm walking down to the end of the hall and back. It was so you kind of go into this sleep deprivation, and I remember the first night at home hallucinating all sorts of things, walls turning colors, sheets moving, just all sorts of weird things. I'm just kind of sitting there like, I wonder if this is what night terrors are like. Yeah, it was kind of you get up in the morning, and I'm normally a stomach sleeper, or pre-first surgery I was a stomach sleeper. And about a month, couple weeks to a month afterwards, I remember, I guess my body had forgotten that I had open heart surgery, and I guess I tried to roll over, and it still hurt like the dickens. And I remember it hurting so bad that I couldn't scream. I wanted to, but I couldn't. It was absolutely incredible on that aspect. But and then you got all your follow-up appointments and everything else. So you've got your GP. I had a mechanical valve. I have the St. Jude valve installed because I was a type A ascending, the worst one, obviously. And so I had to get, and spent 6 months getting used to the clicking, sound at night. If any of you out there in chat have a mechanical valve, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I have a couple friends in the industry who do have mechanical valves, and I remember calling them up and being like, how long did it take you to finally, not get driven crazy? Because the best way I can explain it is you have a metronome sitting right by your ear at all times. There's no shutting it up, and to make it worse, you put earplugs in. I was just one of those. It would just drive you crazy, and eventually you get so tired that you would fall asleep. But it's a very pervasive sound that you keep hearing. At some points, obviously, there's a time that you recognize, okay, it's good that I can hear it, because that means things are still working. But yeah, that took some getting used to. All the appointments and everything else having to be taken care of. I hated every minute of it. And then you start down the road of, okay, what happened to me? What did I just survive? Who else is out there? And you start asking those questions, and then you learn that you're 1 in 100, 1 in a million type of situation where, for how long it took them to recognize what was going on and get you into surgery, like you were into rarefied air for, what you survived. And I started to get real depressed, and a few friends of mine were like, "You're having survivor guilt because you're starting to ask yourself the question, why me and not why other people?" But one name kept popping up in all my searches, and that was John Ritter. So started reading everything that they could put out, and started watching everything that could happen with those. And it's an interesting situation to be part of, I guess, a fraternity of people that you just don't want to be a part of, but you're glad that you're a survivor at the same time. But depression and mental health following that type of event was very fragile. I couldn't sit in the same chair where I was eating dinner that night for 4 or 5 months. Didn't even want to look at it. Every time my kids were around, you'd start bawling your eyes out because you were just like, I almost didn't have this. You start to, little things stop annoying you at that point. There's a lot of introspection as far as growing up, maturing beyond I would say consumerism and, worrying about some of the little things that don't matter in life. You stop. Um, there's a lot of noise in the world, and so there's a lot of growing up when it comes to that. When everything goes along those lines. But 2000 and in 2021, I had my gallbladder out, so that was fun. Not aorta related, so I won't talk about that too much, except for the fact that as a mechanical valve holder, you have take warfarin. So I had sat in the hospital for 4 days while they weaned me off warfarin with heparin drip. Did the surgery fine, and then had to bring my INR back up post surgery, and they wouldn't let me leave until then. So I for a outpatient procedure or a one night stay for normal people on a gallbladder, I was in the hospital for 9 days. And I begged them to give me Lovenox to bridge me because if they didn't let me leave the day that they let me leave, I was going to miss my oldest first day of kindergarten. And I was like, I'm not missing that. I may have been a little terse. And I went back on my follow-ups and apologized to the doctors about some of the things I may have said to them because I was mad. I was just flat out mad. I was going to miss Andrews's birthday or first day of kindergarten. But they got me. They got me my Lovenox and that. So, and then everything started looking great. And I was like, okay, time to move on, time to go, and that's that. And then September, I started running again. I was like, everybody through my cardiologist and everything else were like, yeah, just monitor your heart rate, make sure that you're not pushing things too hard, making sure that you're not, you used to be able to do an 8 minute mile, or you probably won't be able to do that again, but you can, definitely work up to the 12, 11, 12 minute miles. You can, keep those. And they encourage me to at least, speed walk and things like that because it's good for you. It helps you keep, regulate your blood pressure. So I started doing that. I walked a half marathon in that November in 2020. It was, felt great. Everything felt great. Everything was moving in a direction that I wanted it to. Obviously, with the gallbladder out the next year, I considered that just a speed bump in things. That's kind of a regular procedure that doesn't really have all that much fear behind it. Obviously, things can go wrong, but especially with warfarin and blood thinners. But I was pretty confident that things were going fine. Was on your standard regimen of drugs. There wasn't a lot of terrible things. My heart rate was as good as it had ever been. Metoprolol may have had a little bit to do with that, but it was always in the 70s, and now it was in the low 60s. And I was feeling pretty good. I hadn't gotten a blood pressure monitor yet. Nobody had really suggested that to me until I had switched cardiologists, and I'm glad I did. And that's obviously the next part of the story is the investigation. So not but a month after started the investigation of you're 40 years old. This doesn't happen to 40-year-olds unless there's something there. And again, they did the standard old battery of tests for Marfan, and they're like, you're not a classic case. We don't think it's that. So they sent me to Children's here in Omaha, Dr. Starr, love her, Dr. Yetman, and started doing the whole process of what actually happened to me, switched cardiologists. She was the one that was like, you have to go get a blood pressure monitor. Otherwise, I'm not going to like you very much. And did the whole cheek swab test and everything back. I came back as a variant of unknown significance or mutation of unknown significance, whatever it's called. But my Dr. Starr looked at me and was like, you've had an event, you have Marfan, you're done, my FBN1 gene, that's it. My youngest son, I passed it to him. So, hey, we know now his life is going to be quite a bit different than having to deal with an emergent event like mine. So that's good. Now we know going forward, and always happy that we were able to at least learn that through this process. Um, yeah, now it's now thought it was everything was going great until September 17th, 2022. Um, I remember everything about that week and everything up until that Sunday. Monday the 19th was surgery, but Scott Frost had just gotten fired from Nebraska football. I'm from Nebraska, so go Huskers, and go Blue Jays. I'm a graduate of Creighton, so But Scott Frost had just gotten fired. Mickey Joseph had been hired as the interim, and everybody was like, "Oh, it's Oklahoma week. Oklahoma traditionally is Nebraska's big rival in college football." Uh, and so we're all gearing up for that. And my son had a soccer game that day, and my wife was taking him off to soccer that day. I was planning on watching the game. And my parents, again, happened to be in town that time, just so happened. And it was interesting because I woke up that day and I'm like, man, my back feels weird. And it was a couple hours in the morning. I'm like, man, this just isn't getting better. Because normally, if you have some muscle pain or something like that, you can kind of position yourself to where it doesn't hurt anymore. Or you can lay on the floor. And I got in the shower to take a hot shower and try and loosen things up, and that wasn't working. All of a sudden, the chest pain started, and I started the process of going into denial, like, this isn't happening, this is not happening, this is not happening, this is not happening, there's no way this is happening. And it took me probably an hour to convince myself that you're an idiot, you should have already gone to the ER at this point. So I walked downstairs after the shower, and after having convinced myself that I needed to go to the hospital, texted my wife, told my mom, who was with my youngest, I'm driving myself to the hospital, and took off and just left, and did everything I could to stay under the speed limit. On the way there, got to the ER, checked myself in. Doctor walks in, and I'll never forget this exchange. Doctor walks in, says, "What are you here for today?" And I go, "I think I'm having another aortic dissection." He looked at me and he's like, "Don't confuse your Google search with my medical degree." Actually, what he said. And I looked at him, pulled my shirt up, to show him my zipper scar, and said, "This ain't my first rodeo. I need a CT. I need it now. Don't question me on this one." And he kind of sheepishly looked at me like, okay. And they got me to a CT. And he came back up and he's like, "Unfortunately, you're right." And it was probably one of the worst one of the worst is like, you're like, everything's going fine, and then that second day happens and you're like, oh no, not again. My dad and my wife showed up at the hospital, so that we're there in the ER, and they're talking to me about what to go on. Now, for some reason, there were no beds at the hospital I was at. This all turns out to be very lucky, because they ended up transferring me from CHI over to Methodist. Methodist is because the guy that did my first surgery at CHI had retired, essentially. He was no longer doing it. And if you were to ever have any cardiac surgery in Omaha at the time, he was the one you want to do it. Well, his understudy was at Methodist, or is at Methodist. And so my wife was just offhand was like, "Well, if you don't have any rooms here, what about Methodist?" So they called over there. They had one room for me. So they sent me, got to ride in ambulance, lights and sirens all over again. And it was an interesting ride, because the people that are talking to you, and they're like, "So where are we going?" And I'm like, I'm going to go have open heart surgery again. um, but what had happened was, they had on the upside of the arch, they had obviously done the sleeve after the valve replacement. But what things had reopened up on the repair on the way down, and then on the inside of the arch, things had herniated pretty badly, and I don't believe I had started to bleed out quite yet, but it was getting to that point, and a rupture was within the realm of possibility. So they had me basically held up on a bed. The 18th, they wanted to do scans again. So that was the 17th. The 18th, they're trying to figure out what to do. What Dr. Merritt came in and was like, we'll want to see and get some second opinions and throw some things around and maybe fly you to Houston. You may be taking a flight to Houston to get this done. Or Denver. I think Denver was a possibility. UPenn, Houston, or Denver, I think, were the three ones that she threw out there. And then my sister-in-law obviously steps up and does her puts on her cape and does her hero doctor thing and starts calling around to people she knows. She knows one of the understudies of Dr. DeBakey, the Dr. DeBakey. And so I guess he's up in Wisconsin or she's up in Wisconsin. Not sure. But she throws my scans up there. They start talking. They do a powwow, I guess, on Sunday and start talking about things. All of a sudden, things kind of start sliding downhill for me. And then Monday, my memory really starts cutting out on Sunday into Monday. Monday is when they did the surgery. I guess Monday is when my O2 dropped into the 80s. I guess I started throwing up at that point. My wife has told me this story a couple times, and I'm just like, man, I can't remember any of this. Luckily, late enough in COVID that she could be there the whole time. It was pretty quick after that they're like, we're going to intubate you and we have to go. But yeah, it was pretty quick on Monday that they got me into surgery. Then I remember waking up with my mother-in-law and my wife in the room, and I was just wide awake right away. I guess they didn't wait to take the intubation out. They just took it out, and I was just there on that one. The problem I had the second time around was my kidneys were not having fun. It was, I guess my wife had told me, this was like, yeah, they were like, they had the ports and everything for dialysis if your kidneys didn't restart, and they took your ports out and then your kidneys started throwing a hissy fit. So I guess, Murphy's Law or something along those lines as far as that's concerned. But yeah, through the whole thing, my kidneys probably didn't get back to functioning correctly for another month. But I was able to at least take in fluids a little bit at a time. But the second time around was weird because I had no pain at all. Like that night, I was sleeping on my side, no problem. I was in the hospital for another 4 days after that. So I left Monday. So, okay, so here's the weird. So they kept me out I woke up. So surgery was Monday. It was either Wednesday or Thursday that I woke up. And that's a trip. If you've never had this happen before, absolute mind screw of losing days. Because in my mind, it was Sunday when I woke up. And no, it's Thursday or it's whichever day, Wednesday or Thursday. I'll have to go back and look, but it was a complete mind screw on that one. But from that point on, I really didn't have much pain as far as that's concerned. I never had to use opiates or anything like that. I was actually just on regular old Tylenol at that point, from that point on. and was able to use Tylenol from that point on, just to control things, even for months afterwards, for anything. Obviously, ibuprofen can't use anymore. I made the joke before all these surgeries that, the Obi-Wan Kenobi line of he's more ibuprofen now than anything, instead of more machine than man. But yeah, the second time around was nuts, which that Friday, the Friday following surgery, I was supposed to be doing an event with Jason and Noah Ritter, doing a 24-hour charity stream for the John Ritter Foundation. And obviously that didn't happen. But got to talk on the phone with Amy Esbeck, got to share some emails and stuff like that with some people involved in that organization. Had a lot of support from them. But the nice thing was the second time around was Beth was able to be with me in the room, keep me company, brought the boys up, every night. Got to eat dinner and stuff with them at night down in the cafeteria. Was able to take my little thing of my heparin drip with me and get down the stairs. Yeah, the second time around seemed a lot easier as far as the recovery. I don't recommend doing it a second time because the recovery is easier. Please don't take it that way. But I remember Dr. Merritt and Dr. Langdon, who did my first surgery, coming up to discuss, where things were at and what they had to do. So they had to put an endograft inside on the way down. And that which uses outward pressure in the aorta to make sure that blood doesn't flow around it, and so it stays out of the dissection itself. And obviously with Marfan, there's a pretty big concern with that because it doesn't really adhere, and obviously with connective tissue disorders, any expansion of your aorta isn't going to rebound. There's no elasticity because there's no fibrillum, which means that your elastin doesn't work right, which means, things get brittle. But it was the best they had. It was the best solution they had at the time with what they were working with. Dr. Talukdar did an amazing job on that, at least getting me to the point where things were okay. And then November was my follow-up CT scan, and we got the absolute worst news ever, which was your endograft failed, and blood was pooling behind and forming another aneurysm, which at that point they were very concerned with as far as how fast it was growing. And so then all of a sudden, all the back and forth started going of what do we do now? What surgery is necessary? They started talking about the elephant trunk surgery, and that just scared the absolute Jesus out of me. That was quite possibly hit me harder than it did the first time around, as far as like, oh crap, what's the mortality rate on that thing? It's in the double digits. But at that point, we were like, okay, we'll send our stuff down to Houston. If anybody's going to know what to do, it's going to be Dr. Caselli. And so we did. That was November 25th. And then it's amazing how these dates get seared into your head. December 13th, Houston called us back, said they'd be happy to take our case. Early Christmas present. Got hooked up with them. They figured the first step was to do the carotid subclavian bypass because they thought that the third branch was what was not allowing the endograft to adhere. And I don't know why. I don't know the ins and outs of it. I'm not a doctor, but they were like, this is the next step. We have to do this anyway. If we're going to do the whole messy thing, we've got to do this first anyway. So we're doing this anyway. Got that notification January 5th. Set the date for 2 weeks later on a Wednesday. We flew down to Houston, in January of 2023. On Monday, got hooked in, got to the hotel, spent that night there, and then Tuesday you do all the pre stuff. Wednesday, show up in the morning. They can only keep you one night for that surgery. Had Dr. Caselli himself do the surgery. He had flew back from Milan to do my surgery. I feel pretty special about that. And from that, Friday flew home. And so in my mind at that point, it's just a stopgap. Things are still terrible. My cardiothoracic and my vascular surgeon here were both like, don't do anything. Like, don't walk, don't, if you can avoid anything that makes you sweat, increases your heart rate, a lot, does anything to extended wise jump your blood pressure, we need to stay away from everything. So I went from, walking in recovery for, at a 9% grade at 3.5 miles an hour to not doing anything. And that went on till April 5th. Was it March 20th? No, March 25th is my next CT. It was first or second week of April that I had my follow-up CT after that. And that's when they found out that the bypass worked better than anybody had anticipated, completely shunted off the aneurysm. And so what they fully expected is at the end of the endograph, there was still a little bit of space in between the wall of the aorta and the endograph, but they just figured that that's just going to be like a river eddy. There's not going to be a lot of pressure there. But at the top, it had sealed things off. That's great. So, they're like, you're going to feel some weird aches and pains in your chest and back. It'll be fleeting. If you notice anything extended, obviously that's when you get back to the emergency room as fast as you can. But you'll have some weird back pains and things like that, because what we expect for this to do is to embolize and, clot up, get everything, get everything as self-contained. Asked a lot of questions, like what happens if something breaks off out of this, or like nothing will break off. There won't be, a lot of pressure on this. And so in April had my follow-up, and then in November had my second follow-up, when they discovered that everything had worked even better. The aneurysm had shrunk because, as you know, when blood dries, it shrinks. Nothing new in there. There was no expansion at the end of the endograph, no real pressure there. My vascular surgeon had kind of joked that like maybe it was a little bit better that it was a little bit disconnected, because so you don't get that instant pressure outflow, that you have this little spot where it can kind of, as a river goes by, it kind of just swirls there and then keeps going. And here I am at this point. So my next CT is March 25th. Fingers crossed for that everything looks again the same. And then I get back to once a year CT scans in September. I'll see my cardiologist again here sometime soon. I'm sure I'm forgetting some things, but long story, the biggest things that I can say out of the whole thing was, A, pay attention to your mental health. You're going to get depressed. You're going to have survivor guilt. You're going to have a lot of things, especially right when you get home, when all of the hospital support system ends and you're relying upon, friends and family and things of that nature. You start to get a lot of time to think, and being alone with your thoughts can be a prison in that instance. It's very hard to grasp with the gravity of what you've been through, first time and second time. I can't imagine what it would be like if there's a third, and I can't imagine what it is like for those people that have to go through a third surgery. It is definitely seek counseling, seek a therapist, seek somebody. You need professional help as far as that's concerned. I would definitely suggest that to anybody that's had to go through this. And then also, I would also recommend whoever is around you that has obviously is affected by this to seek therapy as well, because you're not going to be able to communicate how you felt going through what you went through as the same as your caregiver, because it was a completely different scenario from both sides. The best way that my therapist today likens it to World War II soldiers in the Eastern Front and in the European theater and the Pacific theater. They had nothing in common. They couldn't talk to each other about their experience. It was completely different for a variety of reasons. And it's the same thing with your caregiver and you, the survivor. There's a major disconnect as to what you went through. And you need that outside. It's a traumatic experience. It's absolutely 100% traumatizing. And don't deny that. Don't deny yourself the fact that you went through trauma. That if you're a caregiver, that you went through trauma, that the people around you probably don't know it, that they're also going through it. But out of everything, I think it's and some things that do make it harder probably in my own instance is my oldest son is now 7, my youngest is 6, two boys. Um, they've started to realize just the seriousness of what's going on. Stig, has to take a pill every day to help regulate blood pressure and things like that. But even at 6, but the sartan drugs have shown to actually help guard against any aneurysms later in life. So we're hopeful that those studies are as accurate as they can be as far as those results. But it's been an interesting experience. It's been a wild ride. So I don't know if anybody's been asking any questions in the chat, so I will look at that. That's my story as far as it's concerned. If anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer anything.
Peter, you tell a very good story.
Maybe. I don't know.
Oh, you
Maybe it'll
do.
resonate with somebody.
Let's start with our hellos. Hello, Velda. Hello, Bruce. Hello, Nina. Hello, Molly. Hello, Ryan. Shayna. She was echoing you with the mechanical valve there as well. And Molly as well. She was saying the same thing. Um, During the very first portion of your story, uh, in the very beginning, people are just like, "Oh my God, just scan. Why aren't we getting scans?" You know, and I hear a lot of these stories, and so in that age range, it is just not something that is done. In this age range, the physicians, they're not even thinking about running a scan. They're like, you have anxiety, like you need to relax, like we've run all of the heart protocols, there's no heart attack here, like that enzyme thing. And thank God they held you to retest, because so
Yeah.
many people are just asked to go home to free up space for somebody who, quote unquote, is having an emergency. But yeah, right. And then like, going in for your second scan or second emergency, and just saying to the doctor, no, not my first rodeo. Right. Like, again, that's a thing that we talk about in these support groups. We talk about self advocacy, and it's important that you were doing a really good job of relaying the physicians that are helping you out. They don't have the same experience that we have, that you have, right? So there's not really there's a disconnect. That same disconnect that you have with your wife. It's a different story, different angle, different experience. And so they're not going to tell you anything that's going to be helpful for a 40-year-old post aortic dissection survivor, because the data is so low.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's the rarest thing. And what other complications come with that for you? It turns out to be a Marfan's diagnosis, and then right away test the family, 50% chance.
Mm-hmm.
and you've given this to your second son, I believe you said.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you're hitting everything that we want to talk about in our support groups all of the time. Be able to share your story. Um, you know, Understanding the anxiety, the trauma. Like, very, very often we talk about, how well do people dream? What kind of prescriptions are you on? Do you feel like you're under a wet blanket because of your B12 or, your blood pressure medication or what have you? And you just see people just kind of lighting up as different things that are happening to them in the support groups just keeps going. And we love that you guys are willing to tell your stories live. We love it.
Yeah, and there's been some other, there's obviously with the ADD side, you can't take your stimulant medications anymore. So you have to
Oh
live with
yeah.
the full brunt of ADD in your life. It's a very that has been one of the biggest adjustments I've had to make is, my ability to my executive function is to say it exists would be an insult to existence.
Yeah, fleeting
Uh,
maybe. Like a hummingbird, you might say.
yeah, so that's been things, and that's I've been working with therapy on things like that, but it's there's that yeah, the initial of getting the blood pressure medication right and annoy your doctors seriously. There's these the my chart apps or whatever, Epic or whatever, you can communicate with your doctor. That don't think you're annoying them if you get on medication and you don't feel right. Tell them that day, send a message that day and get it right, because don't sit there and wait for a month to get back in their office feeling like absolute dog to adjust things. um,
That
they're
is,
there to serve you. They're there for you. Use them.
yeah, that's great advice. And something that we've observed in there when we do get people, we have a doctor of pharmacology come on and she does a lot of answering questions. And so very often, sometimes she'll say, just change the date and time or the time of day that you're taking some medications and see if it alleviates like the sluggishness or the sleepiness or what have you. And so there is some she's just like, well, after I've had patients for X number of years, I start to step them down on certain things. It's, again, the literature doesn't really exist, but it's a thing that you can take back and have a conversation about. And we get feedback in the support groups about people who are lowering certain prescriptions, finding a much better status for life going forward, and again monitoring that. So during these medication changes, we have noticed that there may be a 2-week time lapse between when the old medications are finishing out and the new medications are ramping up. So definitely get on your providers about any secondary effects, but be aware if you're going to make that change. There's a window where you just have to keep your log going and be ready to talk again right back. Hey, this is happening,
Yep.
and
I think
the
for
self advocacy.
a
Sorry.
couple months, I was texting them every week about my blood pressure. After the second one, I was like, "Here's where my blood pressure's at." you know.
Right on. So we do have some questions here. So Shayna is asking about exercise. What's the recommendation now?
I am pretty much on a no lift limit. My cardiologist was like, you could probably lift up to 20 pounds, but we need until you've had your third like clear scan. So that'll be this upcoming one. That things from the bypass worked. There's nothing, which obviously was disheartening because that means I can't pick up my kids anymore or anything like that. Although they can stand on a chair and jump on my back, and I can give them a piggyback ride. So I still have that going for me.
That's a win. I consider that a win.
I consider that for what I've been through. I consider that a win. But yeah, that's as far as other restrictions. My cardiologist said, look, if you can get back up to running 10-minute miles, you're fine. You should if that's like a goal of yours, I'm not going to dissuade you from it. My vascular surgeon looked at me and said, probably don't do a half. You're probably done doing that level of distance and thing, and that. But a 5K, is realistic, or some, if you want to participate in some things like that. you're good to go for that. If you want to do a half, you're going to be walking it. You're not gonna train to go that hard again, which was a bummer because I love doing the half. I love the feeling of finishing. I love the whole, the whole thing around it, and everybody, congratulating each other at the finish line and everything like that. So that was awesome. I'll miss that, but that's my restriction right now. But yeah, and then I think there's a comment about scans in here. Yeah, I have regular scans every 6 months up until this next September, and if everything's good, then I go to once a year CT. In between surgeries, it was once a year. Um, it was only once a year, and so when the pressure at the end of the sleeve after the valve, I guess that had just blown up as much too quickly, and it got to a point where it was nearly ruptured. Luckily, I knew what was going on that day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask that follow-up question about the in-between, so you nailed that one. So Ryan says, curious if you saw increased issues with ADD after having been on heart-lung machine a couple of times. Complicating factor for you may be that you were allowed ADD meds prior because no Marfan diagnosis.
It could be. It could be. However, with my running and training and everything like that, my cardiologist said it's very unlikely that did, because my blood pressure, like leading up to all of this, was always 110/70. Like, I never had high blood pressure for anything. Never had to even think about blood pressure. It was funny because before the first surgery, I had my annual physical, and my doctor looked at me and said, "Yeah, if you have any trouble, in your life, medical wise, it ain't going to be your heart." Well, technically, I guess he was right, but
yeah, he was not wrong. That's true. But more specifically about increased issues with ADD. Did you see anything about that get attached?
So I had major brain fog for after the first surgery, probably a few months. After the second one, it was really bad. I had trouble remembering things pre-surgery, like just the most mundane things. I would have trouble with names of people that I have known for my whole life. I had trouble attaching names to faces. I had lots of just memory issues along with that. As far as executive function, it never existed in the first place.
Fleeting.
So my ability to start a task had always been attached to crisis mode. And so I don't think it really could have gotten any worse than what it was. Now, my ability to stay on task, now that you mention it, maybe that did affect things a little bit. But yeah, my executive function, I don't think it could have gotten any worse, but my ability to stay on task, definitely. Yeah, I would say it's likely that it had an effect. But yes, Molly, brain fog is real. That I don't know how to explain it, because I would look at my wife and I'd be like, "Who are you?" "Oh yeah, okay." And it would just take a couple seconds for things to register. Man, it's weird.
We commonly call it pump head.
Pump head.
Yeah, they call it pump head. There's like stories, anecdotal stories that you hear about inside of the support groups, where people will be like, "Oh, I'll walk into a room, completely forget why I walked into that room, just turn around, leave the room, and hope it comes back to me."
Yep.
Right? Or forgetting the second half of sentences. That's another common one.
I forget that anyway with ADD. Finishing sentences are always hard. But yeah, it's I would say One of the other things that's been interesting over this time has been actually meeting and talking with doctors all around. I've been a part of some other groups, advocacy, either advocacy in other areas or things, and I'll meet a doctor or whatever, and I'll tell them my story, and they'll look at me like, "No, you didn't," because no one survives that, let alone twice.
Hmm.
But I'll hear stories all the time. My wife's cousin is a nurse, and she comes up to me and she goes, "I recognized exactly what was going on because of you. I know your story, and things like that." And unfortunately, the story that she told me, the person didn't make it because it was, recognized way too late. Um, but yeah, there's some doctors and there's some ER. I think ER doctors definitely need to hear more stories of what things are, because I wasn't a classic case. I didn't have the back pain. I'm thinking maybe if I had the searing back pain that somebody, would have been like, okay, get him scans and could have got, saved hours on that. And that it had to take me offhand remarking about childhood Marfan, thoughts for anything to be done. So yeah, talk to ER doctors. I think we need more ER doctor education for sure.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that. During your story, as you talked about getting Marfan's the diagnosis and then having your son tested, um, Karen Anderson is also the president of Think Aorta US. And this is a global kind of initiative to get the emergency responders from, again, firemen, ER, 911 operator going forward. Like, hey, by the way, think aorta. It's the great mimicker. If it's not a heart attack, if it's not a stroke, if it's not gas or anxiety, acute anxiety, get a scan, CT scan for, definitive diagnosis. And that's the idea, is to push that information out to far and wide. Um, and so it's an interesting push. Like, we've seen some growth in Canada should be launching here very soon. Brazil launched a year ago. A couple of other European countries also launched, and it's you know the most we can hope for is, hey, by the way, you know see if you can get this scan in. This scan is going to take 5 to 7 minutes. You're going to get your information as quick as possible, and most importantly, time is of the essence.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember my Dr. Merritt talked to me the second time around on that Sunday before the day before surgery about wanting to get me in for another CT just to see how fast things were progressing, because I wanted to see if they could get me to Houston. But she looked at me and she's like, "I don't want you to be in the CT scanner if you haven't if you start, needing to get out of the CT scan, because
Right.
that could be a problem." So they were debating back and forth whether to get me back down there. That's about the only real thing on Sunday I remember. But yeah, it's I don't know whether my brain is just like, that's such a traumatic event that I'm going to shut off your ability to remember what happened that day, or what. But as a defense mechanism, but crazy what your brain can do.
Yeah. And so, can I ask? Did you have an opportunity to download the aortic dissection, the patient guide from our website?
Yes,
Okay,
I
wonderful.
haven't gone through it with a fine tooth comb, but I have here. If I can remember, thought of it.
Well, all I would ask, and this is something that we talk about in the support groups, bring that with you and introduce your doctor to it, and be like, so this is part of an organization. There's no real literature that gets handed out for people that go through this.
Hmm.
You're kind of, and here's, I'm going to do some shameless plugging here. Lauren's Hope is a thing that we do for emergency response bracelets and jewelry. Uh, One of the things that they said during one of their presentations was, when do you have this conversation about, by the way, if for whatever reason you should pass out in public, you need to be able to, give this information to people. You should look at a bracelet or what have you. We do the help belts thing where it says, aortic hope. It's got the emblem on it so that the emergency techs recognize it and they will take immediate action. Health information right there. Um,
Hmm.
But then again, like this, just a pamphlet of, hey, this is what you went through. This is what to expect on the way out. And, here's a glossary of terminology that you might want to get a little bit more familiar with, up into including medicines, the different prescriptions that you may be, asked to take, so on and so forth. And so in the support group, people will say, hey, I ordered my stuff and I took it to my surgeon.
Yep. I have a work trip in New York City coming up with a coworker, and I ran them through. I go, if we're in a meeting and I fall over, here's what you have to do, and here's what you have to know.
Wow.
And it's hard to have that conversation, but it's real.
Yeah, that's definitely the first time I've ever heard those words. You don't think about it as a coworker.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is I've worked with these people. I've been where I work for over 10 years now, and so they've been very supportive of everything, making sure I'd come back when I'm ready to come back and that. But it was everybody's walking on eggshells at this point, like trying to be like, what are you capable of? And I would say advocate for yourself in the workplace too, because this isn't a forever, you're done, you're on disability for the rest of your life thing. You're going to have to get back to living. And I do suggest getting back to living, enjoy life. Sometimes this is, the wake up call that you don't need to sweat the small stuff, unfortunately. But yeah, it's, I would say, advocate for yourself, not only at the hospital, but at work and in your personal life too.
Yeah. That's probably the best advice we can give, right?
Yep.
Do you have anything else you want to share with the chat?
Got all the questions, it looks like. So no, I mean I'm starting to document on TikTok, Irish Swede, all one word, my return back to exercising and everything. And so once a week or so, I kind of just take a video of, hey, this is what I was able to do. Here's my plan. I have a 10K coming up at the end of the month, and I'm going to walk it. But yeah, I'd like to be able to get back to running 5Ks again. This is me documenting my journey, and even through TikTok, through just hashtag aortic dissection and survivor and things like that, I've reached thousands of people just through that. So any little thing to get the awareness out, it works.
That's awesome. All right.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah. Go ahead and close it out, sir.
All right. Thank you.